Today on the Wrestling Roundtable, the career of Jerry the King Lawler and
ECW, ECW, ECW.
Welcome to the Wrestling Roundtable. I'm Eric Santamaria, the host, and I've been a fan of pro wrestling for 23 years, been working in pro wrestling, about 8 this month, believe it or not. Wow, 8 years. Well, I keep saying that, but let's see how long that lasts. But introducing the panel first to my right, which is your left. First up is Rodney Legant. He's been watching wrestling, kind of on and off for the past few, but watching wrestling for 23 years. And Orlando O'Neill, who has been a fan of 21 years. To my left, which is your right, appropriate since we're talking about a famous pro wrestler's career. Pro wrestler, the American Psycho, Alex Payne. He's been wrestling as a pro for 6.5, but he's been watching as a fan for 24 years. And Jerry the King Lawler is something that we wanted to talk about because, of course, the heart attack that happened live on the air during Raw on September 10th. And of course, that's an unfortunate thing. It's, I think, a first. And you thought WCW's main eventers were old. Now, at least when they did heart attacks, it was fake. That doesn't make it any better. But the point is that this is the first time this happened. And of course, it sucks because everyone likes Jerry Lawler. And that's why we wanted to look back on his career, because I think it's safe to say the majority of pro wrestling fans only know him as a voice on Raw, or maybe some of the angles he did in the WWF. Unless you grew up in Tennessee, where he was a big regional star. He started in 1970, to give you an idea of how long he's been wrestling, and he became the king of Memphis in 1974 by beating Jackie Fargo, who helped train him. And from there, he pretty much, throughout the 70s and 80s, worked with some of the biggest names, actually almost all the biggest names you could possibly think of. And of course, we know his famous angle in 1982 with Andy Kaufman. We'll talk about that a little later on, I'm sure. But as the years progressed, CWA, which is Continental Wrestling Association, which he had a big hand in, the Memphis-based CWA, they started working with the AWA, and so he's getting a little bit more prominence in the pro wrestling world. But by that point, AWA started on the decline anyway. But that seems to be the story throughout the rest of his career, is this cooperation along party lines. Because from CWA and AWA, we go into USWA and the WWF. They essentially became a developmental for them. Yeah. And then, of course, he was involved in the ECW angle with the WWF. And he's always had that sort of sweet deal where he's got the contract to be an employee as a commentator, and they let him wrestle elsewhere. So he's been keeping active, but after this heart attack, we don't know how much longer that's going to last. He still hasn't come back, no timetable just yet, which is, I think, appropriate. But it could spell the end of at least his in-ring career with the WWF, because the reason maybe not the reason, we'll see. He's not very active in the gym. I think he's pretty much made it known he doesn't go to the gym. Or he's not a drug guy either, but I guess we'll see about maybe if they want to involve him in angles in the future with CM Punk or The Miz or any of the other new guys like Bryan Danielson. Can you imagine anyone else who's wrestled Bryan Danielson and Andre the Giant? It's just ridiculous to think of how long this guy's been wrestling, but he was also wrestling elsewhere in the world, in Aruba with Kevin Nash's crew thing or whatever the hell it was. He wrestled a couple times that weekend before he wrestled on Raw, and then had the heart attack. So for all we know, it could spell the end of his long run, at least in the WWF. But that being said, as I mentioned, of course, he's known as the King of Memphis. That's where he was the top regional star. Do you think that's the best he could have hoped for? With his skill set or his notoriety, do you think he would have worked as he wanted to get on a larger scale, like maybe in the NWA and the WWF? Or do you think that's about appropriate where he could have excelled being the star in Memphis?
I think being the star in Memphis was definitely the highest that he could have gone. Around that time, it was the land of the Giants up in New York. And this is why I still emphasize how important territories are, because now you don't get these established stars in WWE as you did back in the 80s and 90s. I think there he really found his niche down there, and he got to wrestle the big names and still be the hometown hero and get to the level where he got. I think if he would have started with Vince's creative mind working behind him, I don't think he would have got to that level. I think he would have hit a certain point in the mid-card, but I don't think he would have ever been main eventing shows in WWF like he was WWF.
Well, it certainly was it's certainly an easy formula for him to be the top star of a territory and bring in all the names for him to beat, and then he ends up being 75-time USWA champion and 87-time CWA champion sort of thing. But comparing it to the Land of the Giants, on the other hand, you had the Crockett territory, Jim Crockett Promotions and Mid-Atlantic, and Flair wasn't the biggest guy either. So do you think he might have worked?
Well, I think he might have worked for the individual. He could have worked for Vince too. He was a charismatic individual. I don't think it would have been too much of a far stretch of him coming in to challenge Hogan for the title in '84.
I'm not saying he couldn't work for him.
Yeah.
I'm saying he would have gotten the status that he did down there.
He did wrestle Hogan, but I don't think we even need to go that far. If we would just look back at Zbyszko and San Martino in around 1980 or so, Jerry Lawler's about Zbyszko's size.
Perfect size. No, especially if we're going with the Vince Jr. age, and we used him then wrestling against Hogan. I think if he would come in and he was calling out Hogan, and he was the king of wrestling, because they were throwing in more gimmicks, and maybe this could have been a pre-Savage doing the king gimmick. I think it would have been perfect for him completely. I think he would have excelled just fine.
He certainly would have been a better king than Harley Race.
Yes, absolutely.
Holy shit, was that
He would have been a great contender.
But as I mentioned before, he's been active in the WWF. We all remember, of course, his great Bret Hart feud in 1993 and some of the other mid-card sort of feuds he's had with either Ultimate Warrior or Jake the Snake and other sort of things. Even recently, like I said, The Miz and CM Punk. But do you think he's been underutilized in WWE? Because, yeah, he's doing the commentary, but what's great about Lawler and all these guys, whenever they put Michael Hayes or whomever, Arn Anderson on TV for 1 Week Piper, those guys are old school, and you can see it, you can sense it, you can feel it. There are no fucking Hollywood writers.
They feel so comfortable and they're so natural
and
on the
authentic.
microphone.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why when they do bring out Lawler with the dust balls off of him and get him in the ring, people are into it. Obviously, he's established people like him, but he also brings something to it that's a callback to the way things used to be when I think they were better, along with a lot of other people. Not that I'm anti-PG or whatever, but that being said, do you think he's been underutilized? Because even in recent years, people are like, oh, they've cut the balls off of him, and he's not as funny as he used to be, and he's just this like kind of baby face that's
underutilized in terms of in-ring ability. No, I think he's perfect where his role is right now, but in terms of where the direction that WWE wants to go, in that PG direction, like you were saying, he's holding up, he's doing good, but if this is back in the Attitude Era where every week, puppies, puppies,
oh God, that was bad.
I loved it. But I think during the Attitude Era is where he showed his diversity in commentating, but now he has to be more structured.
Me personally, I like when the Hart Foundation reunited and he was crying on
Oh.
That's what I think the peak was going.
Well,
Yeah,
we'll get into our favorite moments for Jerry Lawler in a bit, but before we wrap up the first segment, I wanted to mention Andy Kaufman, of course. Now, what's great about the Andy Kaufman angle in 1982 is that it really set the stage for celebrity involvement in wrestling. Originally, Andy Kaufman wanted to do something with the WWF. Vince McMahon Sr., who wanted to keep everything pure and don't do Rocky III, Hogan, and all that bullshit, nixed that. And then the next thing we know, Jerry Lawler's on David Letterman's show doing this work shoot, essentially. Do you think that that really showed that wrestling was still relevant, or at least it could be in the years before WrestleMania when this bullshit McMahon took wrestling out of the smoky little halls, which isn't even true in his own company. But do you think that really showed that wrestling was still mainstream, or at least it could be?
Yeah, of course. And showed that you didn't need Vince McMahon or Hogan to get that mainstream attention. That you just needed a wrestler as charismatic as Jerry Lawler, and I think it also brought a lot more eyes on Andy Kaufman too, and helped both of them out. And here we are 30 years later still talking about it.
Well, Andy Kaufman was also one of those guys that respected wrestling so much, loved wrestling so much, that he didn't even want to break character on this at all, just stuck with it to the end. Is that the sort of dedication that you don't see anymore?
Oh, absolutely. Times have changed, of course, too. Everything's out of the box. The door is open. Everybody knows that wrestling.
And everyone has cameras on their phone and everything like that. So
Exactly. So it's kind of hard to kind of keep everything in the box. But at that time frame, it was fantastic that this guy, I hate Lawler. Lawler's a piece of shit. He left it up. He made sure everywhere he went, he made it known that he hated Lawler everywhere.
Perfect time. You got the early 80s. A lot of fans aren't as smart as they are now.
Right.
They don't have
The internet.
the internet and cell phones and stuff like that, especially down south where a lot of it dug. This is real wrestling. So they really hated Andy Kaufman, and if they knew Andy Kaufman was coming to the Mid-South Coliseum, they were going to buy the ticket because they wanted to see Jerry Lawler kick his ass.
It certainly worked out a lot better, even with the swerve with Jimmy Hart. Worked out a lot better than Charlie Sheen with Daniel Bryan. We're going to talk more about Jerry Lawler's career when we come back.
I always said Charlie Sheen.
See?
They had some crap on Raw and they never do anything.
They're supposed to do it at SummerSlam.
How about Daniel Bryan and I have a match at SummerSlam?
or whatever the fuck he
It was
said.
bad.
What, he was on Raw? I loved it.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Join us on all our social networking sites, Facebook, Twitter, of course, YouTube, GFL, Blog Talk Radio, and the hub for everything, WrestlingRoundtable.com. Joining the panel to my right, your left, is Bill Markey, fan of 16 years. Thanks for joining us once again. And we were talking about everyone's favorite alleged statutory rapist, Jerry Lawler, which doesn't sound like him at all. Speaking of people younger than him, Brian Christopher, of course, we know is the son of Jerry Lawler, and that's something they would always deny, at least on WWF TV, and I always enjoyed that aspect of it. Do you think that he should have been more involved with Brian Christopher? Could they have gotten more mileage out of that? Because we've even seen now they don't even bother with father-son stuff, even when they've got more second, third, fourth generation wrestlers that could use the help, and they don't do it. I mean, they did shit with Ivan Putski, too, with Lawler and Christopher a little bit. Do you think they could have done a little more?
How far could you have gone with Brian Christopher? No offense to him.
Not over the border.
Oh, sorry. Well, I mean, with Brian Christopher, I mean, for a while, though, I mean, he did have something good with Too Cool. A lot of people loved Too Cool. So I wouldn't say that as a performer, he was totally a failure. In regards to his angle with his dad, the most to do is hint at it, but I guess they really didn't see special things in him. It's different when Cody and Ted came on. I actually wanted to see more of them and whatnot. Brian Christopher, there was something about him that I wasn't drawn to him. I don't think Jerry Lawler, and I'm not sure if you guys feel the same, was going to necessarily make me want to see him more, no matter how enticing the angle. I'm not sure if Brian Christopher had a lot to offer.
I thought it was better that they never fully went on and said, that's my boy. The heel persona that Brian Christopher had and the heel commentary that Jerry Lawler had, and Jim Ross would always hint, oh, that's his son, that's his son. Oh, no, but you know, he lives good though, that's a good kid. They would always go back and forth, Ross and Lawler. And finally, when Scott Taylor came on, Brian Christopher finally was coming into his own. They were able to form Too Cool, and they didn't really need the King.
I don't know. I enjoyed Brian Christopher, at least to an extent. I think they could have done a little more, even though I really enjoyed the denial. And I think Laura was just saying that so he would appear younger to the 20-year-olds that he hangs out with. But we're going to move on to some of our favorite matches and moments of Jerry Lawler's career. Like I said, I think most of the fans out there probably haven't seen it, and that's why you should utilize YouTube while you can. There's lots of stuff that you can look up, and Jerry Lawler had a lot of big matches outside the WWF against Ultimate Warrior, Jake the Snake, Bret Hart, that sort of stuff. In fact, what's really interesting watching the USWA connection, like I said before, they were kind of the developmental in '93 or so. As the Bret Hart feud is unfolding on national cable television that we saw, it was unfolding in Memphis too, with the roles reversed, where Bret and Owen and the WWF guys were the heels. We even saw Vince McMahon appear and hint at the corporate Mr. McMahon that would appear years later. It's kind of funky watching it back now.
I had no idea about that until I read Bret's book, and he talked about traveling down to Memphis with Owen, and they would be the heels down there. It was kind of like the Hart Foundation '97, but reversed, where Lawler would be the heel in WWF, but he'd go down to Memphis. He's the face, and watching Bret Hart and Owen Hart play shitty heels in Memphis was freaking awesome. YouTube it.
What were some of your favorite Jerry Lawler matches?
I've seen a little bit of what he did with Hogan and guys like Dusty Rhodes. Really, I grew up on the Lawler, who was more so behind the mic more than anything. It's funny, he gets his WrestleMania moment and it comes against Michael Cole. And unfortunately, I guess maybe that's because it's the most recent big match he's done. That's the thing that always comes to mind in recent time.
That's unfortunate.
Of course, because again, I grew up on a different Jerry Lawler.
Right.
He still throws a hell of a drop kick.
I thought you were going to say
for
punch.
his age and whatnot. No, you know.
At least he did get a WrestleMania match though, because it took a long time for that to happen. But it's funny comparing Memphis Lawler that a lot of us haven't seen unless you were there, and WWF cable TV Lawler, because when people talk about an empty arena match, let's say, like The Rock and Mankind halftime heat, which I thought was just utter garbage comedy.
Like the one he had with Terry Funk.
Right, you look at a real empty arena match like him and Terry Funk in CWA in 1981. That is brutal. There's not anything funny with stupid camera angles at the finish about it and answering the phone.
These are all raw. The only thing that was maybe out of the box was Lance Russell doing the commentary during the whole thing, but it doesn't matter. The match was intense. They both looked like, we don't want the fans there, it's been so brutal. These two guys go tooth and nail at each other, and Funk losing his eye, or losing his eye, bleeding and screaming. Davey Lawler, you're the best son of a bitch. And, oh, it's so guttural, it's so, it's awesome. It's just awesome to watch. You don't see that often. If they had that sort of empty arena match years later, that would be pretty cool.
And he would do a lot of hardcore type stuff, like him and Jeff Jarrett against the Moondogs, concession stand brawl, USWA,
Savage and him, Lawler, Savage, steel cage match. One of the very first cage matches. It wasn't steel. It was like
They had a
wooden
couple,
and-
but the
It was
big
like
one.
chicken wire, yeah.
They had a couple cage matches, but I think the big one was in 1984.
at the Mid-South Coliseum. The heat that they had for that feud, and Savage jumped up the top of the cage. It was cool. It was awesome to watch.
Macho Man. Loser leaves town match is June of '85, Mid-South Coliseum. And this is Savage's last match before he goes off to WWF. 25-minute match. Lawler has 5 moves this whole match. A right hand, a left hand, a low blow, the fist off the second rope, and a pile driver. I counted this throughout but the crowd is going ape shit.
Yep.
Savage and Lawler have the crowd in the palm of their hands, and basically Savage beats the crap out of him the whole match. Oh, and if you want to count Lawler's strap as a move, as soon as he puts that strap down, the crowd goes nuts, and that's the end of the match. But for 25 minutes and watching Lawler do 5 moves and watching Savage just pound him the whole time, they had me captivated.
Mhm.
That just shows how great psychology that they had.
Exactly, and it's all in the build too. Of course, we know the famous Austin Idol hair cage match. That's along those lines.
They
but-
drew the fans in, no
Oh, yeah.
interest, generally.
and the build too to Hardcore Heaven '97 in the midst of
Yes.
that ECW invasion, WWF representative sort of guys, and Jerry Lawler was right there, like I said, doing
him in the
hardcore.
arena. It was like,
Right.
it was like they're booing him, they're going crazy. And that was
But that
something
match
cool.
was the perfect blow.
Oh, absolutely. Him showing up at the arena and
Right.
having all these WWF figures coming
Hey,
in.
I'm
that
in
you would
control of
see.
the show. We'll do moments now. Go right ahead.
But I'll segue into it. It's like we're talking about it. It's
Right.
like, you're so used to seeing Jerry Lawler in front of the WWF screen. He's getting pelted with stuff. Well, this is intense. I mean, he's cursing at these people. They have that hardcore match with each other. It was really cool to see.
Another attack that I think of is back to the first one that we probably saw on WWF TV, which was, well, pay-per-view, 1993 King of the Ring, when he shows up after Bret Hart wins. I'm the real king, and Bret's like, that'll work. And then Lawler just brutalizes him with the scepter and the chair. It looked like he
Oh, yeah.
legit got
He
hurt.
made the fans hate him.
Yeah.
He really drew the fans in. What he did to Tommy Dreamer when they first invaded ECW. Even in 2006 when he kind of did that.
A retread of that,
Right,
yeah.
exactly. Lawler had this thing about him where he could really make you either love him or hate him. There's only so many superstars who can really do that and keep
Turned
turning
on the
him.
switch left and right.
Yeah.
You either loved him or you hated him, or you did both because he was an awesome heel and he was also an awesome
Just
face.
respected him.
Yeah, either you paid to see him get beat up by Bret Hart or you paid to see him beat up somebody like Michael Cole.
Well, you talk about working the crowd and the psychology, but there's the other side of that, aside from the work bell to bell, is talking people into the building and talking them into getting invested. And in the King's Court, we had lots of moments. Of course, there's the funny shit like Tiny Tim and smashing the ukulele and whatever. Watching one recently, Nikolai Volkov, when he had to be Ted DiBiase's servant with the cent sign on his back, and Jerry Lawler was just riding him. And he was just ripping on this guy way past his prime. No one wanted to really see Nikolai wrestle anyway, but he talked me into wanting to see this match because he was just putting so much heat on Nikolai Volkov. I'm like, I want to see Nikolai kick his
He
ass
makes
now.
you think that he genuinely means it.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Or that he genuinely actually hates the person or really likes him this much. Whatever he's doing. If he's putting somebody over, you generally believe, oh, Lawler really loves this guy, or vice versa if he's trying to put the heat on him.
And of course, he's had so many great one-liners and funny little comments and things like that. But a King of the Ring, which was '94, he did get to main event, which was against Roddy Piper. The build-up to that, wasn't that weird kid who did the Piper impression, and all of a sudden he's with Roddy now at the pay-per-view? I didn't really get that. The match wasn't that great either. But point is, when they're building up to this, I'll never forget one of the comments he made to the kid that your muscles look like mosquito bites on a strand of spaghetti. That was one of my favorite all-time Jerry Lawler-isms. We're going to move on now to Extreme Championship Wrestling!